Hello everyone, welcome back. The Star Beats fan. His doctor told him his wife begged him to stop, but on July 3, 1981, Ross Martin didn't listen. He paid with 40 years in prison. Hollywood wouldn't say what killed TV's best master of disguise, but shocking medical records have now shown what really happened on that tennis court. Even his best friend Robert Conrad couldn't save him, and the studio that made millions off of his talent wouldn't even show up to his funeral. Ross Martin was born Martin Rosenblatt on March 22, 1920, in Grodek, Poland. His family was part of the Polish Jewish community and lived in an area that was full of uncertainty after World War I. His father, Isaac Rosenblatt, was a tinsmith, and his mother, Sarah Lerner, took care of the house. Like many Jewish families in Eastern Europe, they were facing growing instability in antisemitism. They wanted a safer life, so they made the hard decision to leave everything behind and start over in America. At the time of Martin's birth, Grodek was part of Poland, but after World War II, its borders changed, and it became part of Ukraine. In this area, life was always changing, even his name would change over time. Martin Rosenblatt changed his name to Ross Martin, which fit his new life in America. His family left for America when he was a baby, getting on the steamship Nouvelle Rel in Danzig on August 29, 1920. After almost 3 weeks at sea, they arrived at Ellis Island on September 18, 1920. During the paperwork process, his name was written down as Marcus Rosenblatt, which was a common mistake. Ellis Island was the first stop for millions of immigrants looking for a new life. The Rosenblatt family, like many others, traveled in steerage class and had to go through strict medical and legal checks before they could come to America. Once they were cleared, they moved to the Bronx, a neighborhood full of immigrants trying to start new lives. Growing up in this world, Ross Martin learned many languages before he learned English. He spoke Polish, Yiddish, and Russian at home, and later he learned French, Spanish, and Italian. His ability to speak many languages became one of his greatest strengths, and it helped him later as an actor when he played Artemus Gordon in Wild Wild West. He even used Russian in some scenes to add a personal touch to his roles. Martin did very well in school. He went to City College of New York, a top school known for educating many first-generation students, and graduated as one of the smartest students in his class. He then got a law degree from George Washington University's National University School of Law. His future looked set for a stable career in law or business, but that wasn't what he wanted. Instead, he became an actor. In the 1940s, he joined Bernie West to form a comedy duo called Ross and West. They performed in vaudeville and nightclubs across upstate New York, mixing fast-paced jokes with physical comedy. Audiences loved them, and they were very good at time. Though Martin had a natural talent for making people laugh, West later called him a comedic genius. The pair didn't last long because Martin wanted to try new things in entertainment while West went into writing and producing. Years later, West would work on sitcoms like All in the Family, but Martin was already on to bigger and better things by 1953, when he was on Broadway in Hazel Flag, a musical satire based on the 1937 movie, Nothing Sacred. He played Dr. Egelhofer in 190 performances at the Mark Hellinger Theater, and the show was a hit. Martin was unique because of how he carried himself on stage and how well he could mix comedy and drama. Sharing the stage with players like Helen Gallagher and Thomas Mitchell, he showed that he wasn't just a comedian. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Martin became famous for his voice on radio shows like The Cavalcade of America and Dimension X. He was able to effortlessly switch between accents and characters, which led to his own show, The Ross Martin Show. Each episode showed off his ability to play different roles, sometimes switching between voices so smoothly that listeners didn't realize it was the same person. This versatility made him a sought-after voice actor and helped him make the jump to live television anthologies. Movie stars came calling in 1955. His first movie role was as Sergeant Andrei Fodor in George Pal's Conquest of Space, a science fiction epic about humanity's first trip to Mars. The movie had groundbreaking special effects and deep psychological themes. The movie wasn't a big hit, but Martin took a big step forward with it. A few years later, he was in The Colossus of New York, another sci-fi movie. By 1958, his Hollywood career was picking up speed, and this was just the start of a journey that would last almost 30 years. Ross Martin's big break came in 1959, when he played Anamo in Blake Edwards' CBS show Mr. Lucky. Ando was a smart gunrunner who worked with John Vivian's smooth-talking gambler. The show took place on a floating casino, which made it a mix of adventure and danger. Martin's sarcastic humor made Anamo stand out right away in the pilot episode. His plan to smuggle weapons goes wrong when police find a hidden stash of weapons on Lucky's boat. His deadpan, "We are in trouble, I am the one responsible for the gun smuggling," set the tone for his character's sharp wit off-screen. Martin put his own spin on the role. He made up lines on the spot and even made his own costumes. In one episode, he dressed as a bartender to spy on mobster, and he also did his own makeup, which would become a big part of his career. The show was praised for its style and humor, but it didn't do well with viewers and was cancelled after one season. Critics still took notice. TV Guide praised Martin's performance as naturally charming and his skill at switching between languages and personalities. More importantly, Mr. Lucky put him in touch with Blake Edwards, a director who would be very important to his future success. After 3 years, Martin shocked people with his act in Experiment in Terror 1962, where he played Garland Red. Lynch is an asthmatic monster who scares bank tellers. Kelly Sherwood, who was played by Lee Remick. It was very different from the charming Anamo. Martin studied a childhood friend with asthma to perfect Lynch's creepy labored breathing. He also insisted on doing his own stunts, like a brutal garage attack scene that was shot on a single tape. The result was one of the scariest moments in film history. Lynch makes Sherwood listen on the phone as he strangles her coworker. His breathing gets heavier with each second. Lynch's performance was compared to Anthony Perkins's as Norman Bates in Psycho, and the New York Times called him a masterclass in understated menace. Martin was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor for the role, which is a rare honor for a villain in a thriller. He almost turned it down because he was afraid of being typecast, but it became one of the most important parts of his career in The Great Race. 1965. With his role as Baron, Martin showed that he could be just as funny as he was scary. Rolf von Stupa is a sneaky aristocrat in the made-up kingdom of Carpia who is trying to take power. Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis were in the movie directed by Blake Edwards, but Martin stole the show every time he was in it. One of the best scenes is a fight between his character and Curtis's hero. The Baron teases Leslie, "I prefer a man's weapon, how are you with a saber?" and then starts a fancy but pointless sword fight. Martin had great comedic timing. He even made up lines during the famous 10-minute pea fight, which used over 4,000 pies and ended with him saying, "I've never been so deliciously humiliated." Critics loved him. People praised his performance as delectably suave and said he stole every scene without even trying. The movie cost $12 million to make, which was the most ever spent on a comedy at the time. It made Martin an actor who could compete with Hollywood's biggest stars from 1959 to 1965. Martin proved he could do it all. As Anamo, he was the lovable trickster; as Garland Lynch, he was pure nightmare fuel; and as Baron von Stupa, he was a master of slapstick villainy. He was able to switch between comedy and horror so well, which was very rare. He said that his upbringing in multiple languages and legal training gave him a critical approach to acting. His skills went far beyond performance. He had been making characters since his early days in Mr. Lucky. Blake Edwards once said that Ross had the magic to make you laugh and scream at the same time. He could be anyone at any time, which made him one of Hollywood's most unique talents. As Artemus Gordon on The Wild Wild West from 1965 to 1969, Ross Martin changed what it meant to be a TV sidekick. He wasn't just James West's backup, he was also a genius with tools, a master of espionage, and one of the best disguise artists TV had ever seen. Even his co-star Robert Conrad didn't always recognize him until the cameras were rolling because of how well he changed. Martin made more than 90% of his masks himself in his dressing room, where he would start with wigs and build his looks from there. With prosthetics and intricate outfits, the night of the Violent crew never knew what to expect. Valentine's Day 1967, he played a hunched-over gravedigger with bad teeth and a latex hump. He looked so different that some crew members thought he was a background actor. His skill at disguise went beyond makeup. He changed his voice, movements, and mannerisms for every part. Talks 8 languages well: English, Polish, Yiddish, Russian, French. The man could switch between Spanish, Italian, German, and English. He did great with accents. In Night of the Raven, 1966, he played a showy French magician with a waxed beard and an over-the-top Parisian accent. After the fact, Lil's makeup artist Ken Chase said that Martin was better at transformations than most Hollywood effects teams. In Night of the Returning Dead, 1968, Martin played a disfigured arsonist and had to wear full-body burn makeup for 12 hours. The latex caused severe skin irritation, but he refused to stop filming. His dedication reminded many of Lon Chaney Sr., the silent film legend known as the Man of 1,000 Faces. One of his most surprising skills showed up in Night of the Casual Killer, 1967, during a tense undercover scene where he played Chan's Nocturne in an F-flat major on the violin. This wasn't just an act. Martin had studied at Juilliard in the 1940s and was a concert-trained violinist. The scene was filmed on one tape with Martin playing live on set, and the crew gave him a standing ovation. Martin's musical background wasn't just a fun fact, it became part of Artemus Gordon's spycraft in Night of the Fugitives. 1966, during a jailbreak, he hid a Morse code transmitter in a harmonica and sent messages to James West through it. Martin used his violin to calm down during breaks and after intense stunt sequences. Interestingly, his classical training almost cost him the part during auditions because producers thought he was too refined for a Western. To show them they were wrong, he made up a scene where Gordon used a fiddle to distract a saloon full of outlaws, which got him the part. Then, on August 17, 1968, tragedy struck on the set of Adonai's Death. Fell down. From a heart attack that was almost deadly. Doctors found a 95% blockage in his left coronary artery. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and the show lost one of its co-stars. Despite this, he never let his performance get worse. In 1969, he was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor, which was an impressive achievement for a show that was often seen as silly. But just as he was getting noticed, The Wild Wild West was abruptly cancelled on March 12, 1969. The show had strong ratings, it was ranked number 12 on the Nielsen charts, but political pressure on the network's hand after the deaths of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. When Congress started to crack down on violent TV shows, Wild Wild West was an easy target, even though CBS kept showing the equally violent detective show Manx. Ross Martin was at the top of his game until 1968, when he almost died during the 4th season of The Wild Wild West. He recovered and came back to finish the show, but Hollywood no longer saw him the same way. Insurers called him a high risk, and major networks backed away. In 1969, CBS canceled the show because of rising concerns about TV violence, and Martin had a hard time finding lead roles after that. In 1970, he was offered the lead role in the detective show Banyan, which could have boosted his career, but the producers changed their minds and went with Robert Forster instead, who was younger and didn't have any health problems. Martin's agent Harry Gold later revealed in a 1975 TV Guide interview that studio executives were direct about their decision. They told him, "We can't gamble on a star who might drop dead mid-season." Even guest roles came with challenges. When Martin played art critic Dale Kingston in Columbo Suitable for Framing in 1971, producers demanded a $250,000 insurance bond. In case his health caused filming delays, the studio wouldn't cover it, so Martin paid the cost himself. He earned an Emmy nomination for the role, but his income had dropped drastically at his peak on The Wild Wild West. He made $115,000 per episode. By 1973 he was earning just $3,000 for a single guest appearance. His troubles didn't stop with live-action roles. In 1972 Hanna-Barbera cast him as Dr. Paul Williams in Cab 2020. After just 2 episodes the studio's insurers intervened and Martin was replaced. He later joked, "I'm the only actor fired for having a heartbeat." Despite these setbacks he never stopped working. Between 1970 and 1981 he booked 87 guest roles. He became the go-to actor for villains, eccentric smart people and enigmatic masterminds. Hollywood may not have given him a lead role, but his talent was undeniable. He had memorable roles in Hawaii 5, The Man from UNLE, and Love American Style, showing that he could still own a scene. His ability to change into any character was clear from the start. In 1960, he starred in the Twilight Zone episode, The Four of Us Are Dying, as a con artist who could change his face at will. Director John Bram later admitted that Martin made up 4 different accents for the role, including a Brooklyn gangster and a Southern gentleman, none of which were in the script. One of his most memorable performances was in Columbo Sue of for Framing, 1971, where he played Dale Kingston, an arrogant art critic who kills his uncle and frames his aunt. Martin studied real-life art forger Elmer Dory to perfect the role. Martin was so convincing that Peter Falk, who played Columbo, broke character and said, "I hate this guy." Kingston is caught by fingerprinted art books at the end of the episode, which got a 27.3 Nielsen rating and was the highest-rated Columbo episode of the first season. Not all of his parts were serious. In the A Man from Unlee episode, he played a do-it-yourself. Ross played Professor Patrick Hudson, an inventor who makes a machine that turns water into explosives, in Dreadful Affair in 1966. The part required him to use a lot of technical jargon, so he didn't memorize lines. Instead, he made up most of it by using physics terms from his old law school textbooks. Director Joseph Sargent later said Ross sounded like he had built a nuclear reactor in his garage. There was just as much drama in Ross Martin's real life as there was in his TV parts. His journey through love and loss shaped who he was. The man behind the characters and every relationship left its mark on him. He married Muriel Weiss in a small ceremony in New York City on June 17, 1941. At the time, he was studying law at George Washington University and working as a comedian at night. Their daughter Phyllis Rosenblatt was born in 1943 and later became a famous artist in New York. Martin's acting career was just getting started, and he was doing radio work and practicing for Broadway. As the 1950s went on, their marriage became more difficult. By the late 1960s, they had split up but never got divorced. Martin stayed true to Muriel even after she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1962. He quietly paid for her treatment, but the disease didn't go away. On March 15, 1965, while Martin was filming the first season of The Wild Wild West, Muriel died at the age of 47. CBS executives were worried about production delays and wouldn't give him time off for the funeral, but Martin didn't care. He flew to New York overnight, said his goodbyes, and then came back to set the next morning without sleep. Years later, he admitted, "I never forgave myself for not being there when she needed me most." He felt guilty, and he later donated $250,000 to cancer research in her honor. For years, no one knew about Muriel's death. It wasn't until Martin remarried in 1967 that the truth came out. Phyllis, who was 24 at the time, had a hard time with her father's decision to move on. "He loved us," she said later, "but Hollywood became his real family." On September 10, 1967, Martin married Olavi Lucille Parsons in a private ceremony in Beverly Hills. She was a model and documentary filmmaker who had 2 kids from a previous marriage. Becky was born in 1955, and George was born in 1957. Martin legally adopted them by changing their birth certificates to show him as their father. Some people thought this was a strange choice, but for Martin it was a way to make their relationship official. Later, Rebecca said, "He didn't just give us his name, he gave us his heart." Their marriage had a big problem almost right away, in August 1968, during the fourth season of The Wild Wild West. Martin had a heart attack that almost killed him. Olavi took care of him full-time, making sure he took his medicine, smuggled oxygen tanks onto set, and even talked to CBS about reducing his workload. She agreed to a 30% pay cut just to keep him working. The stress of it all took a heavy toll on her. In 1969, she had a miscarriage, which Martin never talked about in public. Despite everything, they stayed strong as a family. Martin's adopted son George became an actor too. He got a part in the 1978 TV movie, The New Maverick, with the help of his father. At the same time, Olav encouraged Martin to try his hand at directing between 1977 and 1978. In 1973, he directed 2 episodes of Love American Style at her request. They were there for each other through everything and stayed together until the end. Ross Martin almost quit the role that made him famous. In 1963, CBS offered him the part of Artemus Gordon in Wild Wild West, but he turned it down 4 times because he had just finished The Great Race and didn't want the weekly TV work. He was also afraid of being typecast. Julian trained Martin, spoke 8 languages, and thought TV was a waste of time. He wanted parts that challenged him, not just ones that paid the bills. They wanted him so badly that CBS made an offer that no actor could refuse, $5,000 per episode, which was twice as much as Robert Conrad was making, creative control over his disguises, and the pilot was put on hold for 6 months while they tried to change his mind. When he finally agreed, he had one last demand: Emu Gordon would never punch anyone, because he's a con artist, not a fighter. Martin claimed that made the writers come up with new ideas instead of getting into fights. Artemis used disguises, tools, and tricks like the sleeping gas cigar in Night of the Inferno in 1965. It was risky, but it paid off. The Wild Wild West premiered on September 17, 1965, and within weeks Martin had 3 times as many fan letters as Conrad. But even years later, Martin still couldn't believe how close he had come to ruining his own career. "Thank God Blake Edwards called me a fool and changed my mind," he said in 1978. Martin's best work should have been in movies, but one role almost came to an end: that Dream. In 1962, Blake Edwards cast him as the asthmatic killer Red Lynch in Experiment in Terror. It was a terrifying performance, but Columbia Pictures didn't put his name in the trailers or posters because they were afraid people wouldn't see Mr. Lucky Star as a killer. The move was meant to make the movie more suspenseful, but it backfired. Critics praised Lynch's eerie presence, but audiences were confused. Martin's voice could be heard in 70% of the movie, but his name was nowhere to be found. When he tried out for other dramatic roles, casting directors turned him down because they thought he was more of a comedy actor. This cost him a part in The Manchurian Candidate, which went to Lawrence Harvey instead. The movie later became a cult classic, but the damage was already done by 1965. Martin had no more film offers, so the actor who used to stay away from TV had to go back to it, even though he was very good at it. Martin's greatest fight wasn't in Hollywood, it was with his own heart. On July 3, 1981 he collapsed on a tennis court at the San Vicente Tennis Ranch in Rona, California. It was a cruel ending. He had taken up the sport to prove his strength after surviving a near-fatal heart attack in 1968. He had undergone quadruple bypass surgery in 1975 and followed a strict regimen of exercise and medication. None of it was enough. Eyewitnesses said he felt dizzy. In the middle of a game, staggered toward the clubhouse, then collapsed just a few feet from the entrance. Paramedics arrived in 8 minutes, but his heart had flatlined. Firefighter Art Bale later recalled his wife Ola V was screaming, "Don't let him die." They shocked him twice, but it was no use. By the time they reached Pomerado Hospital in Poway, he was gone. The official time of death was 3:17 p.m. Cause was a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, often called the Widowmaker. His doctor later admitted, "We cleared him for light exercise, but his determination outpaced his physiology." Olavi was only 20 feet away when he passed out. She had been his rock since 1967, helping him through his first heart attack and even sneaking oxygen tanks onto Wild Wild West sets to keep him going in the ambulance. She said the Lord's Prayer between chest compressions when they got to the hospital and wouldn't leave his side for 6 hours, saying he was just resting. Later, she sued the San Ventura Tennis Ranch for $1.2 million, saying the emergency response was too slow. The case was settled out of court. Martin had already made a scene that was almost exactly the same in 1968 for Night of the Janus. In that scene, Artemis Gordon faked a heart attack to trick the bad guys. Later, Olavi said that the memory stalked her like a bad nightmare. His funeral was held on July 7, 1981, at Mount Si Memorial Park in Los Angeles. More than 300 people came, but there were no speeches or grand eulogies. Instead, a rabbi read Kaddish. Robert Conrad was scared. There. After the fact, Blake Edwards said Ross earned a farewell as grand as The Great Race, but that wasn't his style. Hollywood didn't respond much, only Variety and The Hollywood Reporter had proper death notices. CBS didn't send any representatives, even though they used to pay him more than their main star. Conrad was furious that they cancelled his show because it was too violent and then ignored the man who made it. To make matters worse, his death certificate said that he was an actor who had retired, even though he had just filmed an episode of Love Boat 3 months before. But his fans never forgot. On his birthday, they still visit his grave at Mount Si and leave little violins as a tribute to his most famous role. Leonard Maltin said it best. Ross Martin didn't just die, that day, Hollywood lost a part of its soul.